was a patient where I took the sister and I basically gave the sister's microbiome to the kid with autism, and the kid with autism started verbalizing. You know, I have like friends of mine that come to me and they're like, I keep attracting the same boyfriend over and over again, right? Are they attracting the same boyfriend because that boyfriend is missing microbes that they have?
This episode is brought to you by Balangi, a wellness brand dedicated to empowering women to balance their hormones naturally and reconnect with their bodies. You can learn more at balangi.com. Dr. Hazan, thank you so much for being here. I am so grateful that you are here and for speaking your truth. You have no idea. I've been baking, like the conversations that we're going to have today, I've been baking them. And today I'm going to eat it or cook it. I don't know, whatever the name is. So I'm very, very excited. Are we going to get in trouble today? Or do you think the censoring is not as like so much like before?
I think the censorship is, I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah.
We'll see how bad it gets.
I want to also acknowledge you of how brave you are, you know, and more being a woman, because it's always a little harder. You know how it is.
It's definitely a challenge.
Wow. And I really, really admire doctors and anybody in general where they listen to their intuition, they listen to their gut. They don't want to follow the narrative. They don't want to follow the agenda. And even though you knew that even your life could probably be in danger, you said, you know, I just need to I need to have integrity. I need to follow what God is telling me, or whatever you feel that you felt the call.
Yeah, I think it was more seeing so many things that just didn't make sense, right? I think about my training, Ventura Clinical Trials. I brought drugs to market, right, for pharma. So to see, you know, vaccine studies that don't really have any good pharmacokinetic studies behind them, any good animal studies behind them. You know, I kind of like started asking questions. Why are we rushing? I'm the girl that doesn't rush into things. I kind of like think thoroughly and I say, okay, how would I do this experiment? How would I, you know, look for clinical validation? How will I reproduce the data properly, right? And we jumped into this. And granted, at the beginning, I think we didn't know. We saw these videos from China. We saw people were dying, people were not breathing, you know, so we kind of didn't know what was going on. And so there was a panic, and that was okay. For the first month or two, it was okay. I think once at least for me, once I started seeing COPD, CHF patient who had bypass surgery 2 weeks prior, survived on my treatment, I'm going to be okay, right? If this guy who's way worse shape than I am survived COVID with my treatment, I'm going to be okay. And then it's 10 patients, 20 patients, 30 patients, 1,000 patients later, I'm not losing a patient. I'm conducting clinical trials with the FDA watching me, right? Mm-hmm. And no one's dying on my shift. No one's dying on my clinical trials. I'm doing a placebo-controlled trial where I don't know whether I'm giving the real drug or the placebo. And then the patient crashes in front of me and I do a different protocol and the patient survives. So to me, that was what empowered me as a physician. It's kind of like being that, you know, this captain of a boat, and you've been in the rough oceans and you know how to navigate the boat back to shore. It's the same thing as a physician, right? You start taking care of patients, it becomes, you're almost, you know, in a war zone mode almost, where you're basically triaging and treating quickly and saying, okay, I'm fine. You know, 52, sometimes I was taking care of 52 patients a day, you know, with oxygens that were low. And so once you survive that, and you survive being exposed to all these patients, and you survive treating, and you see the treatment works, you get empowered. And that empowerment is what really got me to speak to speak up, to say, wait, why are we listening to people that are reading data? The data is not the front line, right? So I can take, again, back to the boat, if I can read all the books I want on how to navigate and be a captain of a boat, but until I've actually been on the boat and navigating the boat and basically, then you can't know. You can't know how to fly a plane just by reading the books. So it's the same thing with medicine. It is an art to treat patients. And my problem during this pandemic is we listened to the people that were reading the data. The data is not treating patients on the front line. We should have been listening to the people that are treating the patients and saying, how come this doctor is surviving? How come this doctor has not gotten COVID? How come this doctor has not lost a patient? What is she doing? What is he doing? So that was a big awakening for me. And then to see under the eyes of a clinical trial doctor, the censorship, the retraction of papers, all the stuff that went on with just giving my opinion, right? So it was really an awakening. And it's something that turns you into a warrior. So I became a warrior.
You are a warrior. And it was, for me, 2020 was very intense, but in a way of there was I did a lot of healing that year. I'm going to be honest. I did my first psychedelic. I don't know what's your part on psychedelics. What do you think about that world? But I did my first psychedelic ceremony, and it brought so much healing that after that, I just didn't have any fear. I was feeling so much love. I saw truth so it was just I could see it,
Right.
And even doctors that I was following, that they were pushing the vaccine and they were pushing things that it was so incoherent for me. It was very frustrating, So I mentioned to you before, I was feeling that I needed to save a lot of people with, in my audience. Why do I have a big audience? Maybe I need to speak my truth. I need to say, until I said, people who are going to listen, and people who know, and it's part of the journey and the lessons that each one of us have to go through.
I think, when you have a good audience like that, it's important to basically use that audience to guide them, but to also search for them to search for the truth. You know what I mean? It's important to kind of say, how am I doing the research? How am I doing? Here you are, you had an experience with psychedelics, right? But are psychedelics the right thing? Is that influencing someone else that's listening and saying, you know what, I'm anxious, maybe I should do psychedelics, right? And so it's very important when we have an audience to remember to stay ethical, to stay righteous, to stay open-minded, because what's good for you may not be good for someone else, right? So, you asked me, what are my thoughts on psychedelic? I'm the girl that stays natural. I'm the girl that tries to avoid drugs, avoid alcohol. I try to keep my brain in focus, and I try to keep my microbiome in check, right? And I lead the microbiome research. So everything that I put in my body, I basically go, what am I doing? Is it affecting me? Is it changing my microbiome? And so, I've become, and I've gone on this path of discovery in a way, where I'm essentially the girl that is seeing what Manuka honey is doing to the microbiome. I'm seeing what cumin is doing to the microbiome. I'm seeing what ivermectin is doing to the microbiome. I'm seeing what it's doing long-term, what it's doing short-term, because it affects me. Because I want to know, I want to make an informed consent on what I'm putting into my body, right? I'm the girl that brought drugs to the market for pharma, and I gave an informed consent to patients. And I said, look, this is the best we have right now. I'm giving you a biologic for Crohn's disease. This is the best we have right now. But maybe there might be something better down the road. But at the moment of the research, I knew how to give that informed consent and I knew how to do it properly.
But it started, you saw the data when you were doing all this and you were seeing, but also it had to come from intuition. It had to come from a higher power, right?
So it definitely comes from a higher power, right? Where you're basically, you get this intuition that tells you, yes, I'm on the right path. But then you kind of validate the data by saying, yeah, you know what? I was right, right? So the first thing is obviously that impulse. Maybe this is good for me. Maybe I'm craving this because I need it, right? So that's the first thing. But then the second thing is to say, okay, well, I was right because it increased my good bacteria. Mm-hmm. And then the next thing is to kind of say, okay, well, I did it on me and increased my bifidobacteria or my good bacteria. Now I'm going to do it on someone else. And at that point, it becomes a reproducibility. I always say all research needs to be valid, verified, and reproducible.
Love it. Another question, because I feel like this is something that a lot of people still don't understand and we'll probably never know the truth. Like, how did it started? What happened? Was it a bioweapon? Was it a parasite?
Like when you call it bioweapon, it kind of turns off everybody, right? Because it's sort of like it freaks out. There's this panic mode and it's not productive.
Okay, so how do we call
I think we're going to call it poor science. I think if we call it that way, it makes it easier to swallow.
Okay.
Scientists have a behavior, which is whether, it's they're passionate about their science or their idea, they have a way of convincing others of the science. And sometimes it's not the right science to do. Okay. So when somebody comes up, a scientist, and says, you know what, this is the way, this is the treatment. And then he convinces another scientist and then they go on to this experiment and they go in there, but they realize that halfway around the experiment, it doesn't work. Right. So what happens is instead of quitting and saying, you know what, it doesn't work, let's go back to the lab and see why it doesn't work. There's so much money that was invested in that initial experiment, and these scientists, they cannot quit. So they go the path. And so that's the problem that we have in science right now, is there's almost, to call it like an arrogance. And that arrogance, unfortunately, skews science. And even me, I always say, I wrote the book, Let's Talk. Are we allowed to say it in this podcast? Okay. So I wrote the book, Let's Talk Shit, basically to say, let's talk about it. I may be full of it. I may know it, but let's talk about it. I'm seeing something. I'm seeing something in the microbiome that is warranted to be looked at, right? When I improved Alzheimer's in a patient that was basically couldn't remember his daughter's date of birth, I essentially asked myself, how did I do this? What happened, right? And that was the question. Is there microbiome, is there a role of the microbiome in Alzheimer's? Because I saw that patient improving when I took the stools of his wife and he started remembering his daughter's date of birth with the stools of his wife, I asked that question, right? That was kind of like that light bulb moment where you ask the question. Now, does it sustain the improvement? Is the wife the perfect donor? Was there something in her microbiome that was, that made it that he started remembering his daughter's date of birth? I don't know. These are all the questions. But definitely when you see something and a door is opening, you got to go through the door. Now, at some point, which is science, you end up in a rabbit hole. You searched, you opened that door, and it ended up going nowhere. That's when you have to say, okay, well, that's the wrong door, close it and move on, move to another door, right? Mm-hmm. I think the mistake we make in research and science is we don't close that door and accept that we made a mistake. We need to accept that we made a mistake, and we need to accept that this was the wrong direction. I never really liked the messenger RNA technology to begin with, mainly because I saw, if you ask the scientist in the lab, they'll tell you, the rats are eating their arms. And so to me, it was kind of, do I want to put that in my kid? Do I want to put that in my parents? I don't know. I mean, I saw the animal studies, didn't really like them. The technology itself is not the greatest. I mean, they've been trying to get it out for like years, decades, and it never really came out. There's a problem with that, right? So to me, that's essentially why I kind of stepped back and said, I need to do my own research with this.
Love it. So you mentioned that you helped your client with Alzheimer's remember.
One patient, N of one.
How was that transfer of stool from wife to
via colonoscopy?
Can you talk a little bit about that, or just like...
It was a patient that had C. diff, Clostridium difficile. He essentially, had diarrhea, had taken a lot of antibiotics, ended up in the hospital, COPD, diarrhea. COPD got him to have pulmonary infections, and then he got antibiotics, and then got C. diff. And we tried the conventional therapy, flagyl, vancomycin, didn't work. And then I did a fecal transplant where I used his wife's poop. At the time we were doing, we were all, as gastroenterologists, using the microbiome of the spouse or the children or the family members, right? It's not until the poop became a pharma product that there's a stop in that, that way of doing it. But essentially what happened is I'm in the clinical trial business. I tried to put him into a clinical trial and for Alzheimer's at the beginning, 6 months prior, did a mini mental status on him. He was very severe. It was too severe to enter a clinical trial. So I essentially gave him, I kind of like left him, dropped him from the trial. And then he ended up having C. diff. And then when he had C. diff, I gave him his wife's microbiome, and then he came back to the clinic, and then he could remember things. Of course, people are going to listen to this video right now and kind of say, oh, we want fecal transplant for our father with Alzheimer's. But here's the problem. The problem is, unfortunately, it's not feasible because you need the FDA involved.
Got it. Yeah, I was going to say, because in my mind, it's like you're saying that it could be beneficial for somebody that needs maybe like a good bacteria that, let's say, I have.
Yeah.
But what about, can he transfer? Like, is his wife or is like her immune system or her gut?
But we didn't have the technology back then to look at the microbiome, right? That's kind of why I stepped into this to begin with, was because I wanted to see what microbes did I change? What microbes did I alter? What microbe was the culprit of the disease to begin with, right? And so, I stepped into this to see the truth. And so about Alzheimer's, to discover what is Alzheimer's all about? What is autism all about? What is Parkinson's all about? What are the signature microbes that we see in those diseases, right? I think it's important to look at that. I think it's important to kind of say, what am I doing? How am I doing it? What am I changing? What am I changing in this one person? What am I changing in this other person? I think those are the questions. And it's okay to ask questions and along the way, because this is research. This is a field that's at the beginning. And if I want to do fecal transplant on a patient with Alzheimer's, I have to get the FDA involved, which is thousands and thousands of dollars. We just got approved right now to do autism, familial FMT on autism, which is going to be an amazing study, where we basically are giving the poop of the sibling that we believe is neurotypical into the sibling that has autism to try to change the microbiome, right? Because the idea is that if a kid, obviously kids share the same microbes, and within a family, there could be one kid that's on the spectrum, one kid that's autistic, severely autistic and not verbalizing, and then another kid that is, approaching autism, right? And neurotypical. So is the neurotypical that's, has the same microbes and approaching autism a good donor? Maybe, maybe not. Is the kid that's in the environment, but yet has a good microbiome and has become resilient and doesn't have any abnormal, spectrum disorder findings, is that kid the perfect donor for my kid with autism within the family? So this is something that I'm very passionate about, this protocol, because one, but it took 5.5 years for the FDA to approve that, and hundreds of thousands of dollars in regulatory personnel to kind of push it through the FDA.
So you're saying that, because I know like 2 siblings, then they both are under the spectrum. If
the 2 siblings are under the spectrum, one is not a good candidate for the other, right?
Okay.
Because they share the same microbes and therefore not a good candidate. They both need to be changed. Now, those siblings that are both under the spectrum probably could benefit from a protocol from Dr. James Adams, which is going to come out, which is a product from a donor, a stool donor, a stool bank, right? So what I'm trying to fine tune is basically figure out is there a role for familial FMT in the kid that has not improved from a pharma product, in the kid that has not improved from a stool donor, from a stool bank? Is there a role to utilizing the sibling that has become resilient in that family, and that is neurotypical? I saw it with an N of 1, was a patient where I took the sister and I basically gave the sister's microbiome to the kid with autism, and the kid with autism started verbalizing.
Wow.
And the kid with autism became less aggressive. What we learned from that case was essentially the importance of the right donor, that there were microbes involved in this kid. And that's why he was banging his head on the wall, and that's why he was so aggressive. And then what we also learned is that we need to keep doing it. This is not a one-time. We did 3 times in this kid to get him to where he was. We saw his CARS testing improve. We saw his ATEC score, which is like the improved score from autism, improve. And so, do we have more work to be done in this? Absolutely. We're right now, what I'm trying to do is really fine tune the protocol to basically assess, this is what a good donor looks like. Think about it. We have no idea in the fecal transplant world what is a perfect donor.
Of course.
I have some ideas, but it's not anything that I'm going to say right now and say, okay, this is the way to do it. Because unfortunately, then I'm going to get shot. But I think there's definitely more. There's a lot to be learned. We're at the beginning of the microbiome, and we need to essentially, understand how it goes.
I find it so interesting, everything that you're saying. And you're probably one of the people that has seen more stool.
Yes.
Lifetime.
Yes.
Is there something that you can share, or even somebody what would you tell the audience of like what is important about our poop? Because even listen, I see my poop every day. I talk about my poop a lot.
Everybody.
And I tell them like what's the shape, or what is all these things? What do you think the audience needs to know about their own poop, and even colors or whatever you want to talk about?
I think, change is important. So avoid if you see a change in your bowel movement, something's going on with your bowels. Okay. So that's the first thing. If you see stools that are floating, something's going on with your bowels. Okay. If you see you're having diarrhea, you're constipated, this is new, there's something going on. You're having rectal bleed, call your GI doctor, right? So the shape, the size, the color, all those are important, but more important is the difference from how you were to how you are now. So in other words, you were fine, you were regular, and you were happy, and you were healthy, and then all of a sudden you change, and your bowel movements are floating, and they've changed colors, and they're stringy, and your mood has changed, and your personality has changed. Those are all hints. You're gassy, you're bloated. These are all changes that basically start the beginning of a disease. When you talk to a person that has Parkinson's, for example, they'll tell you, I started being constipated 20 years ago. They should have paid attention to that first, change in their bowel movement that continuously, that basically got them to be constipated, right? So I think those are the important things, to the change from your normal associated with your mental status. A key to a dysbiosis of a microbiome is essentially you're all of a sudden anxious and your bowel movements have changed. You're all of a sudden gassy and bloated, and your mental status has changed. Think about the person that's constipated constantly. They're miserable, they're moody, and think about the person that's regular, that's happy, that's, removing all the toxins from their colons, So I think that's how you notice. You notice the gut and you notice your mental status.
I love it. And that's so true. I always say, like, your symptoms, it's your body communicating with you. Just pay attention and take action, or be curious.
Yes.
Start asking questions.
Yes.
I love that so much. You mentioned alcohol. I don't drink alcohol.
COVID stressed a lot of people. Yeah. And COVID, some people took on alcohol, some people took on, drugs, some people took Xanax, some people took all sorts of things to it was intense. I'm not going to lie. I mean, it was intense for me. I couldn't, I was juggling like multiple, hurricanes at one time, and I was just trying to stay focused, but it was so stressful. So, you have to deal with however you deal with to kind of get that stress off. The problem is requiring something continuous. Then it's essentially the same thing as taking a drug. The key is to really stay away from that the body doesn't need anything but good foods, good sun, good light, good water. That's it. So, and decreasing stress. So if you can avoid that handicap or that drug, then you're healthy, in my opinion. Of course, there's drugs for those that cannot cope, and that's okay. We're not here to criticize anybody on their choices, as long as they realize those are their choices, and they weren't influenced and they weren't forced. You make an informed consent. You decide how you want to live your life, and you go by it. And at the end of the day, whatever choice you made, you live by it, and you say, I'm okay with my choice. And if that was the wrong choice, it was the wrong choice. But at least you had the freedom to make that choice.
Exactly. I love that so much. And I feel like one of the things that I am very passionate about is when you start seeing the things that you're taking to numb something.
Right.
What is it that you're trying to numb? And even, listen, I can have like a drink every once in a while, but I'm very sensitive, and I learned, like, I was like living with that sensitivity and my nervous system, which was obviously affecting my gut.
Right.
Some people are more sensitive to alcohol than others, right?
Absolutely. And some people are just sensitive to stress too. Some people can take on a lot of stress, and some people cannot. That's why we have different levels of sensitivity. We have to be sensitive to people levels of sensitivity. You know what I mean? I think, the world has become so cut and dry and so critical and so rough and so polarized. We have to stop the polarization, and we have to say, this is affecting the microbiome, my microbiome, but it's also affecting the microbiome of the planet overall. During COVID, think about it, everybody was so tense. Good microbes we're disappearing. What does that do to the planet? You think about your bowel movements, you're flushing the toilet, that goes into the planet, right? What are all those toxic microbes doing to the planet, right? Totally. So I think we tend to think of ourselves as just, my body, myself, but really what we do affects others. And we don't just live on the planet like we live on an island by ourselves. We're connected to different people. Think about our interaction today is a mixture of different microbes, right? That are basically, we're just a reservoir for them, and they're allowing us to speak in a way that we want to convey a message to the rest of the world. I think it's important.
So important. And I these questions just pop off because let's say I'm kissing somebody.
Yes.
That is a very stressful and anxious person. Yeah. Can that transfer to me?
Those are good questions. I don't know, but those are good questions, and, I look at the microbiome of people that are bipolar, for example. And we've kind of picked up a signature microbiome in people that are bipolar. Microbes that are overgrown, microbes that are missing. It's kind of like a signature, right? It's like ABC is high, CDE or DEF is low, right? So it's a signature. And my question was, can a person that is essentially bipolar seeking microbes from a person that has those microbes? You understand? Mm-hmm. So it's in a way, it's fascinating when you start thinking of that, because you start, I have friends of mine that come to me and they're like, I keep attracting the same boyfriend over and over again, right? And I have to ask, are they attracting the same boyfriend because that boyfriend is missing microbes that they have? I have those questions. I mean, that would be an amazing study, I think, in the future. But that's, those are questions that need to be asked.
Yeah, I love that, because honestly, everything is interconnected, right? When we talk about energy, we're talking about microbes. It's like,
yes,
it's like we're talking about the same thing. And sometimes we tend to separate it, but it really is the same.
I have two girls, and I have so I have two girls, and I have one girl is identical to me. She's a little hurricane in her own ways, and she and I forever were combative with each other. We're basically the same, and therefore we kind of butt heads a lot. And when I started looking at her microbiome, and she would say, I'm so different than you, Mom. I'm so different. And then I looked at her microbiome. It was actually very similar to mine. And I said, well, no wonder. I'm arguing with myself. And here's the problem. I'm a very strong person, and I'm very, if it's my way or the highway. And it's not a good quality to have, but at least I recognize that this is my, you cannot tell me, take this in your body if I'm not convinced. The whole pandemic, I had done clinical trials for pharma, I had brought vaccines to the market. When this vaccine came on, I looked at all the clinical trials on it, and the what was done on it, and I said, you cannot convince me. And I will look at the data, and I will look at the research. So bottom line is, my kid is the same personality, right? So I had to re-look at myself and say, well, there's no point in arguing, because she's going to do what she's going to do, because she is me, essentially, and a young version. Once you understand that, you can understand how to talk to the person, because you now look at it and say, well, okay, how would I tell a younger version of me that this is not the right thing, because I've gone through it, right? So, because it's tough to convince a strong personality to do something when they're strong. So, it's almost like you have to realize this is the path she's going to go through, because this is the path I went through. And I'm just going to hold her and give her love and encourage her and tell her it's going to be fine. And then that's it, right? But we tend to be, once you understand the microbiome and you understand how fragile it is to change a microbiome, you know, how you can torment a kid, you can stress a kid, you're killing their gut, you're decreasing the longevity. It makes parenting you start parenting differently. You start parenting with the idea of, you know, maybe I shouldn't be doing this. It's not that important. So what if the room is all messy? It's not that important. You let me do it calmly and say, you know, honey, you're going to be, you know, one day a mother. You probably want to organize your closet better. But if you don't want to do it, go for it. You know, your life, whatever. So I think, you know, if people started being more tuned in to how they respond to things, right? You're late for a meeting. Okay. Don't stress about it. You're killing yourself. Just apologize when you get there and say, I'm sorry, I had something happen. You know, your meal is not coming on time. Don't shoot the waitress, you know, because the meal came late. Maybe she has a problem herself and issues that she has to deal with. So I think, you know, if people started understanding how to communicate better, understanding that whatever stress they're putting onto others is coming back to them and they're affecting them, I think it's a different world, you know? What we saw during the pandemic is that everybody was going crazy about the politics. And I was here on the front line. I couldn't care who was, you know, I couldn't even focus because I was taking care, like I said, 52 patients. I couldn't even turn on the news, who's running, who's saying what, etc. So when you start looking at people just so, you know, passionate about who's going to run for president, who's going to win, and you see that passion with anger, you start saying, oh my God, that person's going to come see me and want a new microbiome, but there's no way because they haven't managed their anger, which has basically gotten them to see me to begin with. So, you know, the brain connects to the gut, and you could fix the gut and I can give you a new microbiome. But if you're going to go back and kill it with your mind or with your anger or with your PTSD, then that's not going to help you. So it's important to kind of realize that the mind controls the gut and the gut controls the brain. Whatever you're putting in your gut affects the brain. Whatever you're putting in your mind controls the gut. And it's a two-way highway.
It's like if we don't do things with intention and we just feel like, oh, it's going to be a quick fix,
right,
just short term. Like if you don't
right,
do the intention, you don't take accountability of the patterns and choices that you need to change that
right,
led you to having unhealthy gut.
Right.
It's just going to
keep coming back.
How do you protect your peace and your nervous system? What are the no's in your life, because you need
yes
everything you do, you want to be there for your family, so there's got to be things that you are
so I have a privilege that I test my microbiome on a regular basis because I have a lab. So that's the first thing. The second thing is you know, I tend to breathe and not panic. I don't panic until there's a need for panicking. You know, I'm the girl that's, if a boat is sinking, I'm not going to freak out about it. I'm going to figure out, how do I get this boat back to shore? So I'm the girl that basically can handle a hurricane, can handle a fire. You know, I've survived the Woolsey fire and helped my neighbors with the fires, etc. in Malibu. I'm the girl that basically, I don't panic. I think straight and I go, what do I need right now to get me to survive this hurricane or this fire, right? Panicking, I think, kills your thought process. So I breathe. I focus right at the time that I need to focus. Obviously, I'm always juggling 2,500 things at the same time. But when I need to focus on the one thing that's important, I'll focus on that. Second thing is, you know, I tend to not really deprive myself. You know, I don't starve myself. I eat what I want to eat. if I'm hungry, I'll eat. If I'm not hungry, I'm not going to eat. I don't put myself on a regimen that's so strict, because I realize I have so many things that I have to do that, I need to focus on those things right now. The other thing that I do is if I'm eating, I eat the right foods. Like, I'm not going to eat junk food. I'm going to know where my food comes from. I'm a huge tester of everything. I'm going to know where my vitamins come from. I'm going to know where my bovine comes from if I need bovine, so I'm very big on that. If I test everything. I test the yogurts to make sure there's the good bacteria in there. So this is how I do things, right? As best I can. But this is, again, I have a privilege in that I own a genetic lab that can do all that. But the other thing that I do is I meditate a lot. I meditate, I breathe, I take on the sunlight. I believe in the sun. I believe in the power of the sun. I believe in the power. I hug a lot. I'm a hugger. I believe in, sharing microbes. I play with poop all day long. So, Dr. Feingold, who was the physician who basically started the whole, looking at the microbiome in essence, because he was the man that discovered so many different microbes for autism. And he wrote the book on anaerobic infections. He lived till 97 years old. And all he did till 95, 96 was be at the VA playing with microbes and culturing them. And so, I kind of look at that and I go, maybe that's the answer. Diversity. I also look at, farmers, what they're doing, and how healthy some of them are. Not all farmers are healthy because a lot of them consume a lot of alcohol, a lot of drugs, etc. But majority of farmers that are out there that are doing it the right way, regenerative farms, they're healthy. I mean, Joe Salatin is pretty healthy, and one would look at his diet and say, how is this guy healthy, considering like he's, he loves certain foods that are not necessarily would be in my diet. Yeah. But again, exposure to chickens, exposure to different animals, diversity of the microbes in the farms, playing with poop of the animals, again, exposing yourself to microbes. So I think all that, back to basics, back to the garden, Yeah. I'm writing a book called The Garden of Eden and the Lost Microbe. So it's about that, right? The Garden of Eden was probably this garden that was full of microbes. And then little by little, we've demolished it. And we need to get back to the garden.
All organic, all pesticides.
Yes.
I actually started my wellness journey and my way of communicating, like social media, when I learned about GMOs in 2013.
Yes.
I couldn't believe it, because it's not that I grew up eating unhealthy, but when I moved to Miami, I didn't know. Why was I eating a certain way in Latin America, Venezuela? Right. And why didn't I know why I was eating that? And now I come here and I eat McDonald's and I eat all these things. And then I learn about GMOs and I'm like, oh my God. So I just started sharing about that. But going back to your nervous system, it's something very important. You share something very important. Don't make decisions when you're angry, when your nervous system is in panic, breathe, meditate, go and touch the sun, which is, by the way, so refreshing to just hear somebody saying, because so many people are afraid of the sun. Like, don't get burned, right. But like those, I feel like those light codes are so important for us. Yes. For us. I want to ask you a question, because I'm going to put my example. I have two girls. They're 8 and 6. Mm-hmm. When they were a baby, and obviously postpartum and all these things, and you have to make fast decisions. To both of them, I made the mistake, and I do think it's a mistake, but it was a learning lesson for me. I gave them antibiotics. Mm-hmm. And both of them started developing like eczema, and even they used to be able to eat blueberries and strawberry. Mm-hmm. And now I can't eat them like a whole, but now like they're good, but it took me years.
Right.
It took me years to get them to where they are right now because of the antibiotics.
Correct.
What could you share for somebody or mom that is listening and that she's going through like something that happened like that with their kids?
So the first thing is realizing that whatever antibiotic you gave your kid, if you just do nothing and let the gut heal, it will on its own heal and bounce back. So I think that's the first thing, because I think a lot of moms overdo it and then they worsen the condition. So I think if you just let time pass and feed your kid the proper foods, yogurts, proper, bread, sourdough bread, just good gut health diet, I think that alone will reestablish their guts, because kids are pretty resilient. And even if you give them an antibiotic or 2 or 3, they will bounce back. I think the mistake that parents do is they overdo it. Okay. They're, let me give a probiotic, let me do this, let me do that. It's too much. You want your kid to redevelop their good microbes. You want them to reestablish the microbiome. You want to, decrease the stress in the household that has to do with the stress of the antibiotic, okay? And know that eventually it's going to heal and the gut's going to heal. Of course, make sure they have the right vitamin, that they have vitamin D. Vitamin D is important. It's a good, we notice vitamin D improves the bifidobacteria. Vitamin C improves the bifidobacteria. So, in short term, those are not bad ideas to do. Check their zinc level, check their selenium level, check their copper level, check, their vitamin D level. So I think those are simple things that moms can do and not stress too much, because I just had a mom actually this morning that I was talking to who thought her kid had the worst gut. And the kid is better now. The kid had started with a lot of problems and the kid's better. And I look at the mic, and she was going to start the kid on so many probiotics, etc. And I looked at the microbiome of the kid and I said, the kid is fine. She did some stool testing somewhere that told her kid didn't have bifidobacteria.
Okay.
And actually the kid had 94% bifidobacteria. So I'm like, leave your kid alone. You're probably stressing the kid. Just leave them alone and they're going to thrive. And when you do take the history from the dad, he'll say, yeah, my kid is fine, actually. So yes, you will take antibiotics. Your kid will have some issues initially, but then they'll get off of it. And so less is best. If your kid is continuing to have, dermatological problems or GI problems, then at that point, it's time to start rethinking of what you're feeding and saying, okay, well, let me do an elimination diet. Let me play detective. Let me see what foods, with my own kid, my kid was having abdominal pain and I'm a gastroenterologist. I could have easily gone the route of, oh my God, let's do this test and this test and this test. I started off first with a diary. What is my kid eating? And when is the pain coming? And it turns out it was corn, probably GMO corn that she was eating. But every time she would eat corn, she'd get abdominal pain. So elimination diet, evaluating, taking a good diary, monitoring the foods that you're taking with the symptoms gives you a good idea and a good clue. So I think that's the first thing that parents can do that doesn't have to go into a lot of bigger issues. The second thing is obviously if there's a change in bowel movement, see a doctor. And I know the trust is not there for doctors. I think the pandemic has really killed a lot of the professionals out there, but find a good doctor that will listen, good functional medicine doctor, or good doctor, period, that will listen, and then see if you can advance further. And then of course the next step is microbiome, etc. But we're just not there yet with the microbiome. It's all research, and even our testing that we do is research. We do take care of patients, but we're just at the research level.
Talking about how many bowel movements should we have a day?
Everybody's different. So if you're, your whole life, you've had one bowel movement every day, that's your normal. If you've had 2 bowel movements a day your whole life, that's your normal. If you have a bowel movement every other day your whole life, that's your normal, right? So everybody's different. Everybody has a different resilience. I tend to look at constipation as, the ability of the microbiome to hold on to good microbes. And I tend to look at diarrhea as the ability of the body to get rid of toxic microbes, right? But it's the key in gastroenterology anyways, and how I was trained, and I think all the GI out there will say, it's really the change we care about. Okay. It's not necessarily the frequency, it's the change in your bowel movement. And also remember, if you're eating a lot of fiber, you're going to have a lot more bowel movements. Mm-hmm. If you're eating less fiber, you're going to have less bowel movement. I think we tend to not think of fiber, and fiber is the most important food that our gut needs. Fiber increases our good bacteria. Fiber is the bed of the microbiome. Fiber also helps us eliminate. And the average person needs about 30 grams. It's a lot. Think about it. It's 2 pears, 4 prunes, 4 figs. That's a lot of fiber, a couple of bread, a couple of whole wheat toast. So that's a lot of fiber to get to that 30 grams to get a good bowel movement.
What would be like a good add-on for your smoothie to add that fiber? Do you know like inulin? Is that like a good source?
I'm a person that likes natural stuff.
Just natural.
So I like, I'll like, figs, prunes, pears. Pears are amazing, so,
avocados, right?
Yeah. I mean,
veggies and fruits and
exactly. And so you just there's a lot of great apps right there right now where you can just take a picture of your food. I have an app right now because I've gained so much weight from the pandemic that I'm trying to lose it. So I'm monitoring my calories. So you just take a picture of the foods and it tells you how many calories you're consuming. It's great. It also tells you how much fiber is in the food.
Oh, I like that.
So you can monitor your fiber, you can monitor your calories, and that's amazing.
Is the app already?
Yeah. There's an app. Yeah. There's
What's the name? But is it yours?
No. Okay. It's an app that's...
I thought it was yours, and I'm like, what's the name?
No.
Okay, so good quality yogurt, it's a yes, because a lot of people are kind of like, is this true? Like, and kefir, what do you think about kefir?
I mean, I like kefir, but, remember, not all kefirs are created equal. Some of them have good bacteria, some don't.
Yeah.
We're coming out with a test that's going to be allowing the public to test their yogurt. So welcome to contact Progenibiome for that. It's some yogurts have good bacteria, some yogurts don't. It's all in the process that they're being made. I think companies, there is not a way to test quality of products right now. And that's what I want to try to do in the next 10 years anyways, is really empower the consumer to learn more, to educate, to do their own research, to basically investigate their microbiome, to investigate their yogurts, to see, is that yogurt a good quality yogurt? Not just listen to Dr. Hazan or anybody for that matter, because we live in a world where everything is, branded and influenced and everything. So you don't really know what to trust.
Yes.
I tend to want to do my own research. That's who I am. I want to encourage other people to do their own research to kind of say, yeah, you know what? I saw it with my own eyes. This yogurt has good bacteria. I'm going to stick to that.
Love it. I feel like we need to trust and see how we're feeling and need to be truthful.
Yeah.
Like what you said, if your nervous system, if your mood has changed, if you from one day to another or from last week, what has changed? I think it's really important to notice those things. Very, very quick. Do you believe that a clean, let's just say clean, a clean gut, and clean means nourished with all the bacteria that we need, okay? Not like dried up and all that. Do you think there's a connection with that and your intuition? How sharp is your intuition?
Possibly. Does a diverse microbiome help you be more focused? Possibly. Is there certain microbes that help you, that give you that sense of intuition? Maybe. Is there certain microbes that, I had an interesting experiment that I was doing. I see a lot of celebrities as patients and their poop, right? And so, one of those days I'll be publishing on the comedian microbiome, because I think there's a signature microbiome. Think about the guy that's constantly funny. That's a different microbiome than a person that's like super uptight, right? Think about the person that's super anxious. We actually did that study where we looked at anxiety, the signature microbiome of anxiety. It's a different microbiome than a person that's a yoga instructor, meditation, easygoing, So I think, as we get into this, we're going to start analyzing the comedian, the painter, the artist, the musician's microbiome. It's probably different than the guy that's on Wall Street, right? It's a different personality. It's a different microbiome, right? So
that's so great.
It's going to be interesting.
Yeah, because a lot of people sometimes get like, oh, I wish I could talk more or do more videos do all this thing, or I wish
they're missing microbes.
Yeah, maybe they are. I actually want to want you to test my poop.
Well, yeah, we could test your kids too. I like to do the family portrait because I like to see like what's in your poop and what's in your kids that are similar or different.
I love that. Yeah. I'm going to ask you some fire questions. You can just answer
go ahead.
Yes, no, or just like few, or you can
nothing.
Yes. You could also roll your
my eyes. Okay. Good. So,
okay. Colostrum.
Colostrum. Yes, no, depends.
Okay. Peptides.
I'm starting to see some things with peptides.
Is there one in particular?
I'm not going to name because the data is too early. And I keep telling Dr. Elliot Dinetz to get me those patients so we can test before and after. So Elliot is one of my colleagues who basically is in Miami. Oh, okay. So I work with him. So I keep telling him, I need to see the before and after. So send me before you do the peptides, because I want to see each peptide. Because the problem is if you give all those peptides and you see an improvement in the microbiome, you don't know which one gave the improvement.
I love one by one. Elliot.
Elliot, get on it.
On it. Okay. Parasites, are they gross invaders or misunderstood teachers?
Misunderstood teachers, yes.
What about the worms, the ones that are this size?
Okay, well, some people wish they had worms because it keeps them skinny. I'm just joking here because I don't want to like all over Dr. Hazen promotes worms.
No, but I can show you pictures that you would be like.
Well, okay. So first of all, if you have a dysbiosis in your microbiome, you are going to be predisposed to having parasites, okay? Now, is the answer continuing to kill, or is the answer to bring back the good guys so they can suppress the parasites on their own? Bring in the good guys. Stop killing.
Okay.
We keep killing. Like I have people that come in and first of all, these tests are very sensitive out there, okay? They pick up on parasites left and right, okay? So does that mean the person has parasites because they had a test? Maybe they ate raw fish that had parasites in them and it's out of their system, right? Because the whole process of having a bowel movement is to get rid of these worms and parasites. So maybe this was an incidental finding that you saw that, right? And you don't have any symptoms. Why would I go killing? So don't go through a test that basically tells you have parasites and start killing if you have nothing. If you're healthy, do nothing. I'm going to repeat this over and over again. If you're healthy, do nothing. Because that's the problem. We keep killing. And now you went from healthy to, hey, Dr. Hazen, can you give me a new microbiome? No, it doesn't happen. I'm not going to give you a new microbiome because you're going to keep killing it, thinking you have parasites. So no, we're not doing that.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you for those fire questions. Okay, we're done. I can't.
Awesome.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hazen, for your knowledge and for just, like you're strong and bold, but you're funny. You're playful. I think like
balance.
Yeah.
Yes.
I know. I love it so much. If you can say like very fast, one tip of how a person can empower themselves, what would be like the best advice? Just like super short.
Empower yourself by reaching out to a person that is your perceived enemy and embracing that person and listening to that person and starting to hear what they have to say. Because your perceived enemy actually likes microbes that you have, and vice versa. So give a hug to the person that you feel is your enemy, because together you may be a better person.
I love that so much. And for those of you listening, you can dive deeper into her work and her books, Let's Talk Shit and Regenesis. Am I saying that?
Yeah, Regenesis with Dr. Jordan.
What's the best social media that you're more active or that you share more?
X.
X?
Yes.
X is your thing?
It's my thing.
What's the handle?
Sabine Hazan, MD.
Sabine Hazan? Okay.
Yes, and I'm out there. I'm no longer doing caps because everybody was telling me, okay, you're too high strong with the caps, slow down on the caps. So I'm no caps, and I'm rephrasing my sentences a little bit softer. But I love the fact that Elon Musk allowed for people like me to have a platform when I was censored so long during COVID. And yet I was treating patients during the pandemic, and, I wasn't allowed to say what I was doing. So,
and we're going to be posting on Instagram. So what's your Instagram handle?
Same thing, Sabine Hazan, MD.
Sabine Hazan. Okay, amazing. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.